Have you seen this tweet from the Chinese Foreign Ministry? That's the official account of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China, sharing a quote from the former Chinese dictator Mao Zedong during the Korean War, the last time the U.S. and China were shooting at each other. And the message was, China will not yield to the U.S. That's an important signal as to how China sees the current trade war with the U.S., and that is the Chinese leaders do not want to be bullied by the U.S. president, and crucially, they don't want the Chinese people to see them being bullied by the U.S. president. That said, I'm told that Chinese leaders are open to negotiations with the U.S., but at this point, they don't see the channels open for those negotiations, and it's their perception the U.S. is not making an effort to open those channels. This is one more crucial point, that if and when negotiations happen, Xi Jinping is not going to meet Donald Trump, I'm told, at the very beginning of those negotiations. They want the agreements worked out first. They do not want a Zelensky in the Oval Office moment,
disrespectful to the country,
where the Chinese leader would be surprised or embarrassed. And that's key as we wait for any movement here in this trade war between the world's two economic superpowers.
I didn't even think about that, to be honest. Like, the meeting with Zelensky probably did instruct Xi Jinping and some other world leaders, like, there's basically no point in ever talking to Trump. Like, literally, there's no, like, he's actually beneath our time, our time. And time's got to be pretty important if you're Xi, right? I mean, you run China. This is a pretty big country.
Just hours after President Trump called China's leader Xi Jinping a friend, China is calling President Trump's policies a joke and retaliating again. Chinese tariffs on U.S. goods are now at 125%. U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods are 145%, meaning American consumers and businesses are likely in for more pain. Yale's Budget Lab is estimating that Trump's tariffs are going to cost at the average household $4,700 extra a year. Let's bring in Douglas Holtz-Eakin. He was the chief economist for the White House Council of Economic Advisors under President George W. Bush. He's also the president of the American Action Forum. Doug, always great to see you. What does this Chinese escalation of 125% on U.S. goods mean for the U.S. economy?
Well, it's just more bad news. And, you know, as you reported, we saw incredibly poor consumer sentiment numbers this morning. In that survey, by the way.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even I didn't even show those here. I think, yeah, it's in the CNN feed right here. We got a consumer sentiment report from this morning. I wish it wasn't like centered on the right side of the screen for some reason. Consumer sentiment dropped 11% this month to its second lowest reading on record going back to 1952. Look at that. It is 0.8 points above where it was in June 2022. And that was the lowest point. We are 0.8 points above the lowest point in history. Consumer sentiment translates to what exactly? Just whether or not Americans feel confident that the future is going to look good financially, which is really important because that determines consumer spending. Consumer spending, people are more likely to spend money on frivolous luxury goods if they think that the economy is going to go up. If the economy's gone down this much, this quickly, this early, huge recession indicator. Massive, larger than anything else. Honestly, like this is basically the largest recession indicator there is, you know? The point though is that it takes time to get these averages. As you can see right here, the consumer confidence didn't drop that much during the beginning of COVID. And the reason for that is because nobody predicted COVID, right? The COVID lockdown happened. And then by the time you get like an aggregate of consumer sentiment over a month, you know, people are a little more used to the lockdowns. Things start improving. What it really looks at is how much people expect things to go down in the near future, right? Whereas with the COVID lockdowns, it was more like kerplunk, and then things start getting back up. Does that make sense? I think the reason it was so low in June 2022, this was because of the Ukraine war, right? Because you have That was this decline right here. You had inflation under Biden's administration, and you had the Ukraine war, which was huge on the markets. The markets did not like a massive land war in Europe, as it turns out. A lot of problems there. But apart from that, man, we are, less than 1 point above. Investors running away from U.S. assets. Yield on 10-year U.S. Treasury bond top 4.5%. Yeah, we saw that before. If bond yields continue to rise, U.S. consumers will have to pay more for their mortgages. Companies will find it harder to raise funds, and it will put pressure on the American government when it comes to servicing its debt. Oh, boy.
Consumers expected inflation to be 6.7%, the highest we've seen since 1981. So people are expecting costs to go up. Retaliation by China adds to those upward pressures.
Wait, here they're saying it's the highest since 1981. Do they have a slightly different survey they're looking at? Well, whatever.
That money has to come from somewhere. It'll come out of other purchases by households. That's going to slow the growth in the economy. And businesses are comparably concerned about the outlook. So the fallout of this trade war has been very significant already, although it has not yet shown up in rising unemployment, some of the other things you'd want to watch pretty carefully.
A spokesman for China's Commerce Ministry, Douglas, said that the U.S. is risking turning itself into a joke by using tariffs as a bullying and coercion tactic. How are other countries, do you think, viewing the U.S.? Because obviously it is very problematic for America if they are seen in all of this as the bad guy, and China is seen as being more reasonable.
Well, there's a real concern because the White House...
Again, like, if you were another country, which would you rather trade with? China, who is consistent, stable, and a massive exporter, versus the United States of America, incredibly inconsistent, unstable, belligerent, downright antagonistic. Like, it seems like a clean sweep, man.
Has yet to articulate what, for example, they want China to do in order to lower the tariffs. And they've encouraged, 70-odd countries to negotiate with the White House. But to what end? What is it that the White House wants from each of those 70 countries in order to get tariffs to go back down? So if you're just imposing tariffs and you provide no signal as to what the negotiation's about, you look like a bully. You're inflicting pain for no apparent reason. And I think there needs to be a real clear articulation of the strategy, because...
Depends how much slave labor you want to support, but you got a point. I mean, the average worker in China isn't a slave. They have sweatshops, but we do as well. And our agriculture base is fueled by literally millions of undocumented immigrants who are paid under the table. Yeah, I'm not like downplaying the fact China is an evil capitalist country. I'm just saying, like, in terms of stability, it seems like
Right now, we're getting nothing but bad news out of these tariffs, and there's no pathway to getting some benefits at the other end.
The Chinese economy obviously relies heavily on manufacturing. Last year, they had a $1.1 trillion trade surplus with the United States. How much pain do you think their economy can endure, given that the biggest market for them, the biggest market in the world, is the United States?
This is a significant blow to the China economy. There's no question about it. And we're going to see it slow sharply. Now, as you and I both know, the Chinese Communist Party has a tight grip on the country. Its ability to withstand that pain comes at the expense of its citizens, but it will withstand the pain. I'm worried about the fact that people have lost sight that the second largest manufacturer in the world is the United States, and that we do more manufacturing than Japan and Germany combined. And this whole thing is predicated on the notion that somehow the U.S. doesn't have any manufacturing anymore, and that's just not true. What we're doing now is taking the established manufacturing giants in the world, China and the United States, and pitting them one against the other. And as I said before, to what end? We both are going to see higher inflation. We're both going to see slower economic growth, and I'm not sure what we'll see in terms of benefits for the economy.
The U.S.-China piece, and of course it is so big, perhaps it should eclipse the 10% tariffs that are still in place across other countries, but they are. And you have the European Union's economy commissioner calling it a blow to the global economy. To what end there? Sure. Is that clear to you?
No. And I think that it's easy to lose perspective. I mean, it's been
Sorry if I'm being a little bit more quiet. It's just that like this is like the battle, right? I mean, this is for years now, tankies have LARPed about how China is the vanguard of the global proletariat and they will deliver the final blow to America. And now finally, like, the fight is here. This seems like it's it. I mean, we'll see what the outcome is. It's kind of huge. There's actually a lot of videos on CNN relating to the U.S.-Chinese relation right now, which I very much want to look at.
The longest 5-day week in recent economic history. But when the president proposed a 10% universal tariff on the campaign trail, there was essentially universal condemnation of the idea, and most economists saying, "Oh my goodness, that's a terrible idea. That's an enormous tariff. We don't want to see that." But we have that, and we have a lot on top of it. We've got steel and aluminum and cars, China, Mexico, Canada. So the fact that he paused the reciprocal tariffs doesn't mean that he's eased up. This is a tremendous imposition of tariffs, and the U.S. tariff rates are now extraordinarily high. And what will we get for that? It's far from obvious. I don't know what he wants to accomplish.
Maybe whatever he does accomplish in a deal, then he can herald as a success, which we've seen as a strategy of the president. So,
yeah, we'll see how much that happens. Hold on.
There's new reporting just coming into the Situation Room right now. We've learned that the Trump administration had private negotiations with China, warning officials there against retaliatory tariffs. But those behind-the-scenes talks evidently did not work. CNN's chief national affairs correspondent Jeff Zeleny is over at the White House watching all of this for us. Jeff, what's the reaction over there after those warnings apparently fell on deaf ears?
Well, if they did fall on deaf ears, but it's just the latest example in the really day by day, the deepening trade war that is underway between the United States and China. Yes, we are learning that U.S. officials privately behind the scenes urged China to not retaliate. In fact, the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been saying that publicly all along, warning countries to not retaliate. Well, those warnings have fallen on deaf ears, particularly with China.
Guys, listen, if we're going to negotiate, you need to come to us publicly, okay? We can't come to you publicly. You have to come to us publicly. Also, like, don't fight back, okay? This is supposed to make us look good. So basically, okay, so we're going to do like a cool, sick kickflip into a tariff 360, and you need to like go, and then you need to say, please stop, and then you need to ask us to stop, like, Soy fascism. Yeah, this is what happens when you have like fascism, blood and soil, but without the blood. This is what you get, like a hyper irrational, antagonistic, xenophobic foreign policy where no one on your side actually expects anything to happen because you're so used to getting your way all the time.
They raised their tariffs to 125%. The question now is which side is going to blink, if either. And Matt was just talking about consumer confidence. The prices are going to go up. There's no question about it. That's what the White House is bracing for. That's what the administration is bracing for. It's one of the big reasons the president had a dramatic pullback on a sweeping tariff plan just a couple days ago. And the market, of course, reacted very well in the moment. But in a couple days since, it certainly has not. The bond market also has not strengthening. So this is going to be one of the central questions here. But Wolf, we are also learning just inside the White House, the president, as he embarks on this 3-month pause on a sweeping tariff plan, there's competing views from his team of economic rivals, if you will. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, a long history on Wall Street, he is one of the people the president is listening to the most on this, of course. Kevin Hassett is as well. But Peter Navarro, the man right in the middle of the screen there, he is someone who has been very pro-supportive of these tariffs, and the president did
the guy who made up a guy in his books,
not heed his advice this week. So as the president goes forward on this, as the consumer sentiment prices rise, which advisor is going to sort of win out on this? So there's no doubt the president, at the center of all these new trade negotiations, now has to negotiate with some 90 countries or so. So, Wolf, all of this is coming front and center here. Is the economy, that inflation report, the rising inflation, is one of the biggest challenges, one of the biggest worries for this administration.
I do want to bring in CNN's Kylie Atwood. She has some new reporting on how President Trump in the U.S., the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, have interacted, and I guess the best way to say it, have not interacted, Kylie, since this trade war began, and you have some great new reporting on why that is.
Provide it, please, and
Dana,
faster than you are right now.
Hours before these new retaliatory tariffs came out from China this morning, the Trump administration had privately warned Chinese officials of two things. First of all, not to retaliate, which we heard from Trump time and time again over the last few weeks, but also that China should be requesting a phone call between...
Jesus Christ, they're still doing this? Even now, up to now, right now, after China has imposed these massive counter tariffs?
President Trump and President Xi. China has not done that so far. They've been telling China to do this for months now, according to a source familiar with that working level dialogue between the two sides. We know that Xi and Trump spoke before inauguration. They haven't had a conversation as this trade war has escalated. And senior White House officials tell Elena Trine that Trump is waiting for Xi to make the first move here. He thinks the onus is on the Chinese leader to do so. But when you talk to folks, there's a fundamental disagreement about how this could all come together, and that is one of the challenges, as there is this remaining question, an urgent question really, as to how they're going to create an off-ramp for this escalating trade war.
Here is where the trade war stands right now. 145 going up against 125. These are the tariffs between the world's two biggest economies.
And here's another number, 4,700, or about $400 per month. That is how much more money Yale's now estimating, the Yale Budget Lab, that President Trump's tariffs are going to cost average households each year. And with just hours left in trading, the Dow right now.
Breaking, the Fed is reportedly absolutely ready to stabilize the market if needed. Never discount the power of the bond market. By what? Like bailing it out? What would that look like? Buying our own bonds to lower the yield? Yeah, provide a source, not just a tweet.
Up. You're seeing that swing here going into the afternoon, up almost 650 points. But it was up and down there throughout earlier in the day. With us now, we have CNN business editor-at-large Richard Quest. We have CNN chief national security analyst Jim Sciutto as well. Richard, a key economic gauge, the consumer sentiment now at its second lowest level on record, going back to 1952. Why?
We shouldn't be surprised with all that's coming out and all the worries about tariffs. It's not just that, it's the complexity of everything else as well. The changes within the federal government, the worries about job losses, the worries about a slowing economy, higher inflation. And eventually you get these what's known as soft data surveys like the Michigan survey, consumer sentiment. And it's a really worrying number because at some point these sentiment surveys feed into
Just in, a Louisiana immigration judges ruled Mahmoud Khalil can be deported. Yeah, that's not surprising. I didn't really expect much judicial interference with this one.
Data of real consumer spending. And we know this from history and precedent. That's what happens. So when we see a number as bad as this one, it is only a matter of time, unless anything else changes that would suddenly make people more cheerful. Look at that chart. I mean, just look at it. Unless people suddenly become more cheerful, why would this not translate into spending? You see, that consumer lab,
I actually really hate listening to this guy's voice, and I don't think that's necessarily fair. Oh, it's been a while since we've had this genre of video. Ah!
We want to have as many bees as we can to make honey.
At Secret Garden Bees, a honey farm in Linden, North Carolina, farmer Jim Hartman has one eye on his bees and the other on his bank account.
You always got to keep your eyes
Ideally, we'll get 100
on the
pounds
bees.
of honey per hive per year.
How do you feel about paying more for things?
Well, you know, if you find someone who says, I'm happy about paying more for something, you point them out to me. People who already couldn't afford fresh vegetables, who couldn't already afford to put good food on their plate, are the ones that are really going to be hurt by this.
Did you ever think when you voted for President Trump that things were going to cost you more?
and you're going to lose money?
I never thought I was going to lose this much money, this fast.
Jim is a Republican who voted for Donald Trump 3 times.
How do you feel about your vote for Donald Trump now?
Well, I feel like perhaps I should have considered some other options.
Really?
Among other things, Jim imports packaging supplies for his honey, so he's paying real close attention to the tariffs Trump just put in place.
We just bought our
cute
year's
jars.
supply of bottles from Taiwan and our year's supply of corks from Portugal about 3 weeks ago. So that would have been, another 5,000 or 6,000 out of my pocket.
Which is partly why he's repairing instead of replacing this 40-year-old forklift.
The cost of equipment has just gone through the roof to buy anything like that because it just would be cost prohibitive.
He's also holding off on improvements around the farm.
Well, we're not going to hire any more people, that's for sure.
It's more than just the tariffs. For the past 2 years, Jim has been selling honey to the federal government, which then provides it to schools and food banks. But after Donald Trump took office, the USDA cut those programs suddenly as part of the federal government's effort to streamline.
I hate farmers so much, man. There are so many of them who like Trump right up to the White House on the promise of like, we're not gonna, like, the USDA thing, obviously, Project 2025, obviously, but broadly, like, so many of these farmers just don't seem to understand how dependent they are on the government. They have no idea.
Line spending.
For a lot of other local farmers around here, it was a major source of reliable revenue. For me, it's going to cost me around $150,000 a year.
$150,000.
Yeah, roughly 50% of my revenue.
That's a huge hit.
That's a massive hit.
Not far from Jim's farm, we found other Trump supporters who give the president high marks on tariffs.
How do you feel about the tariffs?
Well, I feel like for years we've been getting ripped off, and why not make it fair? 0-0. And I think Trump was upfront about it. He said we're going to hurt some now.
I think some of the countries they're already starting to come around. It's going to be good. I really believe that.
You have faith in Trump?
Yes, I do.
I think these people just shouldn't be allowed to vote. I don't know. What I want to see more, I want to see more interviews of like the crazy young Gen X or millennial or whatever style Trump supporters, because they always show these like boomers in rural areas, and it's like, yeah, of course you guys support Trump. You grew up before public education was a thing or something. I don't know. You grew up huffing leaded gasoline. I don't like, but like I expect you to disappoint me.
I think he's doing the right thing. In order for us to get back where we need to be, he needs to get the money somewhere, and they're charging us. Why not charge them?
Like they back at Jim's farm, though.
It's just I don't know. I think I'm kind of coming around on like we need to make voting mandatory, or we need to make there be like a civics test. A 4-question multiple choice answer question, what is a tariff and who pays it, would like have unironically won the election for Kamala Harris by an overwhelming majority.
Though still plenty of worry. He says raw honey is considered a luxury good, similar to organic vegetables. As prices rise,
I don't know what that's going to do to consumer spending.
Trump paused the majority of the tariffs for 90 days after we'd left Jim's farm. Jim told us by phone, it's flip-flopped so many times you can't take it to the bank. Who knows what it will be next week, adding, it seems like he's heard the American people. Randy Kay, CNN, Linden, North Carolina.
All of this volatility and uncertainty brought on by the trade war that we were just talking about. You've got China announcing it's raising retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods from 84% to 25%. That coming after President Trump hiked the rate of Chinese goods, the rate on Chinese goods coming into America from 104% now to 145%. All of that.
I don't think these people are latent Marxists or anything, but a part of me still believes they could or could have been convinced that all capital was ripping them off, not just foreign capital. Man, I used to believe that, but I just don't anymore. I really think that, like, for the vast majority of them, they just distrust foreigners, browns, blacks, Asians, whatever. And that the foreign capital thing was just a way of structuring that bigotry. I like, these people have consistently, their entire lives, licked the boot on every goddamn issue for decades. It's pretty rough.
Creating so much uncertainty is having a real...
It's the media environment. No, I know. I'm aware of that. It's not an innate property of their brain shape or anything. It's just that the media environment has made them really, really, really resistant to good ideas.
An immediate impact on businesses big and small across the country. One small business owner joined us on the show just yesterday describing how
Linden has a population of 138 people. They don't care about class. They just hate outsiders. This bullshit, man. Then why are they so cool with Trump, a literal, like, East Coast New York real estate billionaire? It's not an anti-outsider thing. Like, they have specific kinds of outsiders they distrust, namely the ones they're told to distrust, you know?
the daily chaos and the changes in policy have left her with no good options.
It's hard to make a decision. You know, we had an idea yesterday after the announcement of, well, maybe we can export to Australia, repackage the products, and then re-import them from there. But because policy changes every 36 hours or so, I don't want to make that decision and make that move only for something else to change in just a couple more days. I'm paralyzed. I can't even make a decision right now.
Paralyzed. Another big area of concern is what this means for American farmers, of course. China is, among other things, the biggest export market for American soybeans. China bought 52% of American soybean exports last year, throwing American soybean farmers, understandably, into a whole new level of uncertainty right now. And joining me right now is Scott Metzger. He's a soybean farmer out of Ohio, also serves on the board of directors for the American Soybean Association. Scott, thank you very much.
He looks like a soybean guy.
For waking up and taking time to speak with me this morning. This change, I was looking forward to getting your take yesterday afternoon, and now we have this new change overnight coming from China announcing 125% tariff on all U.S. goods coming in. That includes on soybeans. What does this tariff on this new level of tariff on your produce mean for you?
Good morning, Kate. Yeah, it's an alarming concern. You know, with the tighter farm economy that we're in now, the tariffs are just adding issues to problems that we already have. We want to. It's just making it more complex and making it harder to make decisions on what we need to do.
Oh, he nervous? Yeah, he's really talking like somebody who, for professional and personal reasons, doesn't want to say anything too negative about Trump, but also has to, like, acknowledge the unavoidable fact that Trump's policies are ruining his business.
I've heard the word complex from a couple farmers actually as well. It's already a complicated situation.
Because it's not complex. That's the thing. The tariffs weren't there, and then they are there, and it's for no reason. It's not complicated, really. You rely on selling soybeans to China, and now you can't because China's tariffing the ever-loving shit out of you. So, like, what's complicated?
And now it's becoming even more complex. I mean, you're, I believe, a sixth-generation farmer, farming with your brother and cousins. Scott, how does this moment feel for you?
Well, you know, we never have, going back to 2018. We really haven't recovered from the tariff trade wars back then, and you know we were probably 40% higher on soybean prices back then, and the farm economy in general was a lot better back then. So you go forward to now with what we are, and you know, a lot tighter farm economy, and complex, and adding these tariffs to it, it makes things really, really difficult. You know, a fear that we have, if this continues into the fall or even into next year, you know, there's a potential that, you know, there'll be some farms go out of business. You know, you could have the next generation not want to come back or not able to come back just because of the the economies or the farm situation in general. And adding these tariffs to this, you know, there's just no room for error. But personally, in our operation in the state of Ohio last year, we were in extreme drought, and we roughly had half of a soybean crop and a corn crop last year. So in our area, it's feeling it even a little bit more. You know, having less of a commodity sale and these lower prices, and now we're throwing the tariffs on top of it.
You're right, Vosh. They don't want to believe their experience is true, pain from Trump's policies, so they believe it must be complex or something that they can't see that will explain. Yeah, okay, imagine that you're a 6th generation farmer. You are on the literal, board of soybean farmers. Your job is to sell soybeans. And then, for no reason, the president says, actually, we're going to start a trade war with the rest of the world, but mostly China, and China buys most of your soybeans, and now they can't. And now your business is totally unviable. And would you be talking like this in that situation? Like, Republicans on Fox News, even when they bring on regular people, will come on and talk like the world is ending over any inconvenience they experience at the behest of DEI or whatever. This guy comes on, he's hedging every word when everything is so obvious and straightforward. I don't know, man. His social and business circle is probably pretty pro-Trump as well. Doesn't want to come across as too partisan, but me. What happened to perceived self-interest, man?
It just makes things very difficult.
And at the White House, in his cabinet meeting yesterday, the agriculture secretary spoke up talking about, you know, if there's one thing, if people know, a group of people who know uncertainty would be farmers and ranchers. And I'm wondering what your ask, your plea, or just your message would be to the president in the midst of this, given your long experience and what you guys are facing.
Yeah, we urge the administration to to quickly couple the announcement with some negotiations to address the tariff and non-tariff barriers with the U.S. exports. You know, we want to, and we're thankful for the 90-day grace period that we got to help some of the other countries come to the table and negotiate with the president before any more reciprocal tariffs comes on for those other countries. And also with China, you know, let's get to the table and get some things done. You know, maybe introduce the phase 2 trade deal on this, just so we don't have this prolonged suffering for the U.S. ag economy. And even with that, it even goes to the, you know, it's not only the ag economy, but it's the rural economy as well. You know,
he was this close to actually asking something about the economy. No. Wouldn't want to say or imply anything even remotely anti-Trump.
For every dollar we spend, it kind of rolls out probably 4, 5, 6 times in our local rural economy. So as a whole, if you don't have a strong farm economy, it usually then goes on down into your rural economy as well.
Yeah, the ripple effects, and as anyone knows, I mean, I grew up in a small town. The ripple effects are very real when the farm economy is struggling. Yes. Scott, it is really good to meet you. Thank you very much for coming in.
That's great, man. Okay, hold on. We've listened to CNN. U.S. consumer sentiment now worse than during the Great Recession. Yep, it's pretty bad. Anyway, hold on. We've listened to a lot of CNN, you know, bet hedging on China. I want to see how Fox Business is talking about it.
Now, Gordon Chang joins me here in New York City. Obvious question, Gordon. Who suffers the most in this trade war, China or the United States?
Well, China does. First of all, its economy is probably contracting. We saw this from the price data for March, where both consumer and producer prices were below zero. Also, the thing is, they're having their 2008 right now. You know, in 2008, they didn't want a downturn. They overstimulated, took on a lot of debt. Now they got to deal with the debt. Property market is collapsing. And then Trump says, we're having this tariff war. And what this does is it really closes off China's biggest market, the United States. So these 145% tariffs, most Chinese goods don't get into the U.S. because of that. Now, the only way that Xi Jinping can win this trade war is if he can convince President Trump, who's holding all the high cards from an objective point of view, the only way Xi Jinping wins is if he can get Wall Street or Main Street or the farmers to force Trump to back down preemptively. I don't think that's going to happen because our president's pretty determined.
Imagine, like, I'm glad we watched the CNN stuff first. Yeah, that's what's happening right now. China is desperately clamoring to try to get Trump to back down. While Trump and his advisors are like, please, hey, please make a deal with us. Please come over and make a deal with us. We can't make a deal with you, but you have to make a deal with us. Please, God.
Could he unleash, Xi Jinping, could he unleash financial warfare? China holds $760 billion worth of treasury.
Also, hold on a second. Don't we literally hold more debt relative to our GDP than China? Like, obviously, the U.S. government has an insanely high national debt. 122% of our GDP versus China's like 77%? Yeah, 77%. More or less. Okay. That's only federal? Okay, whereas the 77% for China is central government, local governments, government branches, and state organizations. So it's just like the overall
debt. If they sell some of it, prices go down and our interest rates go up. He could do that.
He could do that, but he probably not going to because that has a lot of effect on the renminbi. Remember, he wants to sell U.S. dollar debt because he needs to prop up his currency, but he needs to do it in a controlled manner. If he crashes the U.S. dollar, which he probably could do, you know, it's lights out for him. So I don't think he's going to do that. He's got a lot more vulnerabilities than we do. We're the bigger economy. We're the trade deficit economy. You know, we hold the high cards.
Now, Xi Jinping is about to embark on a tour of Southeast Asia, touring his neighbors. He's looking for support, isn't he? He wants them to gang up with...
I thought they were depressing their currency. Now it's propped up. Yeah, isn't the narrative that they artificially deflate their currency to make them a more, like, viable, like, target for exports? They do? Well, yeah, they do. It's a good economic strategy on their part. So why now are they talking about them artificially propping it up? What's the narrative?
Xi Jinping against America. Is that going to happen?
I don't really think so. The problem here is that Xi Jinping now has a lot of goods he's not selling to the U.S. He needs to sell them to ASEAN. These are ASEAN countries. You know, maybe they'll take a few more, but probably not because they don't want the Chinese to decimate their own internal industries. So I think Xi Jinping's going to have a hard time. You know, he'll get these guys to say some very lovely things, but I don't think they're going to move on substantive points.
Okay. According to the Wall Street Journal, Chinese officials held a secret meeting. It was amongst themselves. They acknowledged their role in the cyber attacks on American infrastructure. Responding to that story, Chinese embassy spokesman says China firmly opposes the smear attacks against China without any factual basis. The U.S. needs to stop using cybersecurity to smear and slander China and stop spreading all kinds of disinformation about the so-called Chinese hacking threats.
Sorry, 1 second. I'm trying to like keep up with these numbers here, but my understanding, so it is true that the Chinese economy relies heavily on exports to the U.S. But if I could read this paragraph from AtlanticCouncil.org, China has been preparing for this conflict for a long time, including by diversifying its trade away from the West. Chinese exports to the U.S. account for 14.7% of China's total in 2024, down from 19.2% in 2018. In 7 years, they reduced their exports to the United States by a quarter. That's enormous. While overseas shipments to Southeast Asian and Belt and Road countries have grown, according to Beijing. Overall, about 30% of China's exports last year went to G7 countries, down from 48% in 2000. It is insane how poorly prepared we are for this. They've been building out for this for a while. Meanwhile, we've just been sitting here. Is that a bad thing? It's very smart from their perspective. They've been diversifying. We haven't. They've been making allies. We've been alienating our allies. Yeah, we've just been jerking off. We've done nothing. How much of U.S.'s imports are from China? Chinese goods accounted for 13.3% of U.S. imports in 2024, down from a peak of 21.6% in 2017. Though that's a little bit misleading because Chinese-made component parts then go into stuff that's made in countries all around the world, which then get imported into America. Because China is the global manufacturing center, it's not just direct imports from China to America, it's Chinese industry fuels the entire world's productive economy, and that routes back into America.
Urge the US to adopt a responsible attitude and take a harder look at itself rather than vilifying others. Why do you say that is ominous?
It's because, we've known for decades.
Not to be super conspiracy appeal, but isn't this strangely perfect for China in every way? I mean, it's not strangely perfect. They've been, it's just a good idea to diversify when you have a foreign enemy. Also, remember, the number comparison we just looked at began in 2018. 2018 is when Trump began the last trade war against China. So, literally, all of this is his fault. It's Mike Ehrmantraut, Walter White shit. We had a good thing going, you stupid son of a bitch. We had China. All you had to do was sit there and pay them cents on the dollar for cheap, consistent manufacturing. But no, you, with your pride and your ego, you just had to blow it up. And that's why we are where we are today. Great man theory is being vindicated. And Donald Trump single-handedly is responsible for so much of the trajectory of the world. You know?
Is that the Chinese have gone after our infrastructure and critical infrastructure with cyber. But the point is now the Chinese are actually admitting it to the United States. That's basically saying, you don't scare us anymore, U.S. U.S., you're not deterring us. And I think that betrays a different mentality in Beijing, a very arrogant one, a very belligerent one that really hates the U.S.
As opposed to the attitude over here in the White House, which is very humble and contrite and honest.
So, anything can happen when they're not deterred.
Their cyber attacks can hurt us.
Should a Dem president be hostile or friendly to China? Friendly. They should be listen, you should work with other countries basically no matter what, unless you absolutely can. I don't think we're going to get much done with countries like, I don't know, Russia, Turkmenistan, North Korea, Eritrea. Sure. There are countries that are just off on their own, okay? But the senseless antagonism towards China over the past 30 years has been nothing but post-Cold War fear-mongering from U.S. oligarchs who are terrified at the idea of a Chinese capital competing with them. That's it. The whole narrative of, China rising, China hasn't been threatening us. Oh, this extremely, militantly, we were allied with China for what? Since Nixon, we had relatively good relations with China because we wedged them against the Soviets. But the Soviet Union collapsed. Now they're just Russia. We wrecked Russia and the former Soviet countries with shock therapy. And then China, boomed under Deng. And now the fucking American oligarchs are like, oh, shit, you can do capitalism centered from countries outside of, or from cities outside of New York or London? You can have gigantic burgeoning financial markets that we don't already control? Well, that's unacceptable. Clearly, they're the enemy of the West or something. I don't know. Not to argue that China hasn't done evil things, but we have definitely been the aggressor here when it comes to the international relationship.
Do we have the capacity to cyber attack them and hurt them?
Yeah, I think that we do. We don't.
We're not going to say anything about it, though, are we?
We're not going to say very much about it. We need to be better at cyber, though, because the Pentagon just is not as good as it needs to be on something like this.
Better at cyber. Oh, I'm sure that Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard will do a phenomenal job protecting our cybersecurity interests, or our interests with regard to cybersecurity. I'm sure. I have nothing but faith in them. Dude, I'm learning so much today about how we're about to be made subservient to the great dragon of the East.
Let's welcome back to the show the author of the terrific book, Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. He's the one and only Gordon Chang. Gordon, it's great to have you back on. Gordon, can the president and China reach a deal that basically is good for either side and also would help the U.S. decouple from China?
Theoretically, yes, but I think it's going to be extremely difficult. For one thing, Xi Jinping has configured the Chinese political system so that only the most hostile answers are considered acceptable. And the other thing is that what we complain about, the predatory trade practices, the criminal acts, those are inherent in the Communist Party's system. So, yes, maybe President Trump will be able to hammer out some relationship, but I think it's going to be hard. And remember, the January 2020 Phase 1 trade deal, that fell apart very quickly after it was signed. And that's because the Chinese didn't honor it. So there's got to be something different this time. And I think the Chinese now are more trade dependent. They're more dependent on the U.S. So we can...
This is factually incorrect for reasons we just looked at.
All hope, but we got to be very realistic about what can be accomplished in this circumstances.
Well, they're not in a position of strength. We understand how big their economy is, but their per capita income there, the earnings potential, is in like the low 6 digits. Okay, let me back up. You know, the media is not really talking about this. Is the world waking...
By the way, they aren't wrong about China breaking the trade deal. It's just really funny because it was a Trump trade deal that I think they shouldn't have honored anyway. 2 years ago, Trump signed what he called a historical trade deal with China that committed China to purchase $200 billion of U.S. exports, additional U.S. exports, before December 31st, 2021. Today, the only undisputed historical aspect of that agreement is its failure. One lesson is not to make deals that cannot be fulfilled when unforeseen events inevitably occur, in this case, a pandemic and recession. Another is to not forget the complementary policies needed to give an agreement a chance to succeed. In the end, China bought only 58% of the U.S. exports it had committed to purchase under the agreement, not even enough to reach its import levels from before the trade war that Trump started, remember? Put differently, China bought none of the additional $200 billion of exports Trump's deal had promised. It was a deal that he negotiated to end the trade war that he started. No wonder China started getting ready for divestment from the West. The art of the deal. Vosh, China always breaks promises. It's been going on since the 90s. I wholeheartedly reject the assertion that China is the only one who's acted in bad faith with regard to trade deals. The whole trade war was Trump's fault. And by the way, Biden kept the tariffs on China after the trade war. Don't forget about that. That stupid piece of shit kept them. And then increased them because he wanted to protect Ford.
Up to how abusive China is, because it's not just the U.S. talking tariffs on China. So is the EU, so is Mexico, Brazil, Thailand, other nations in Asia. They're looking at China and saying, wait a second, we're going to put new tariffs on you. We're going to protect our own industries. We're going to push our own trade barriers against China. And Reuters is now reporting that Australia turned down. Australia said no to China's offer to join together to fight U.S. tariffs. Is this...
Yeah, oh, this is a perfect graph illustrating the issue here. Look, total soybean exports by the U.S. and Brazil. Look at that. We had a good thing going. You just had to blow it all up, you with your pride and your ego. America and Brazil were keeping steady pace, more or less, with soybean exports. And then Trump started a trade war where they started getting their soybeans from Brazil. And then even after the trade war cooled off, like, things have just been leveling and Brazil's numbers have been going up. And why wouldn't they? Right?
An inroad that the president can take advantage of.
Yes, and you make an important point, because even last year we saw countries in the China-friendly global south put tariffs on Chinese goods. And I think we're going to see tariff barriers in other countries against China. And the reason is, with President Trump's 145% tariffs, he's basically shutting off the U.S. market. China needs to sell those goods that they otherwise would have sold to the U.S. elsewhere. And I think other countries don't want to see their markets flooded with Chinese goods. In other words, to see their industries decimated by China.
So, final...
It's just like a fundamental rewriting of how the economy works. The idea that having your economy flooded with cheap commodities would be a bad thing. Like, just what an insane... What an insane logic. Capitalism, what it demands of us. It's actually bad now to get lots of useful things for very low prices. That's bad now. Why? Well, because it, like, invalidates domestic manufacturing. Okay, you can still have that domestic manufacturing. What if the domestic manufacturing just contributed to a pool of resources, and then those goods were, like, disseminated as necessary to the members of the state or whoever needs it? I'm sorry, I'm sounding a little bit like a Twitter communist right now. I understand that, like, the removal of the profit motive would actually be extremely complicated and difficult. It would have to be done in a segmented manner. I don't think it's easy, but like you have to admit that it is fucking crazy that capitalism creates crises of overproduction. Isn't that a little bit crazy? Like, I know we're all used to hearing about it. It's just like, what a problem to have. And people die over this. Like, it's not a little problem. Like, it's like life-ruining shit for millions of people. And the problem is we have too much of the stuff we need.
Word. So we're hearing China's going to plow $2 trillion into blowing out its factories to dump a tsunami of goods on the world, cheap goods. Can you talk to us about the weaknesses inside China?
Literally, the rhetoric, a tsunami of cheap goods. They're gonna, dude, you're going to drown. They're gonna straight up kill your ass with 0.2 cent tiny steel springs that can be used as components in other devices. Your ass is going to be torn apart in the floodwaters of low-cost electric vehicles. Okay. Cheap, making it sound like low quality. Yeah.
It's actually, I think the per capita income is anywhere from 5 digits to 6 digits. How weak is China? Final word?
Well, first of all, the economy is probably contracting. We can see this from deflationary price signals. Plus, also, they're having their 2008 now. They delayed their recession in 2008 to now by accumulating a lot of debt. They got to pay it back. They can't do it. And then President Trump puts the tariffs on. Simultaneously.
You can do that? You can push back a 2008 by 17 years? They forgot. Bro, you've been holding off the... Maybe that's what the Three Gorges Dam is holding off. I don't know. You can do it. Just a 15-year delay? That's crazy. Man, the economy's complicated. They do have a real estate debt, but I think it's being managed. Oh, there are real economic issues in China, you know? They've got the population contraction. They've got the shrinking economy. They've got their real estate speculation, like, collapsing in on itself. For sure. I don't think that they're having a 2008 and 2025, though. I don't think that's real. Yeah, why didn't we do that, man? Okay, Comrade Robin Hood, I know what you're talking about. I know that when you put a bunch of a commodity in a place, you lower the price of the commodity. But I'm talking exactly about that, you know? Like I said, it's a serious problem, but it's like it's a problem caused by the profit motive. Also, it's worth pointing out, by the way, that when people talk about dumping as a pricing policy, they're usually talking about it the same way, like with what Uber did, where Uber deliberately underpriced their rides until they became a monopoly and then jacked the price up, you know? They're usually talking about manufacturers pricing things below a profitability point overseas so they can become dependent, or like everyone becomes dependent on that, then they jack the prices up. But that's not necessarily what's happening. In a lot of cases, China just produces things cheaper, you know? And if you want to talk about like, well, they subsidize their electric vehicles, we subsidize our farmers and we export corn to everyone, you know? It's like if we have a problem with this policy, China's not what we should be going after. As people in chat have pointed out, Amazon seems like the first target I'd go after, where they create like Amazon Basics by maliciously underpricing the product until they outcompete the small company that was making it at a profitability point and then replace them, you know? So when do I move to Hong Kong? They've got a great menswear scene there. Great menswear scene.
We do want to go to Madison on this story because China is taking aim at Hollywood and she has the latest. Hey, Madison.
Hey, Taylor. Yeah, China's new target in the trade war, Tinseltown. China has announced it's going to reduce the number of U.S. movies that will be allowed in their market, making the move just days after President Trump hiked tariffs. The China's National Film Administration called it, quote, the wrong move by the U.S. government, adding, we will follow the market rules, respect the audience's choice, and moderately reduce the number of American films imported. Before this, China and the U.S. had agreed to release 34 U.S. films in China per year. The market used to be really hot for Hollywood, but it's...
You know what? I'm happy about this because hopefully it means that the big box office movies made out of Hollywood stop pandering to Chinese slop audiences. Like in the Mulan remake, are you kidding me? Oh my God.
cooling off thanks to a growing Chinese film industry, which is ripe with films that are supported by the CCP. Take a look. In 2019, the year before COVID, China accounted for over 12% of the worldwide box office gross for the top 10 U.S. films. Last year, that number was less than 5%. That is why President Trump says he's not concerned.
Mr. President, China retaliated today by reducing the number of American films that can be shown there. What's your reaction to them now targeting cultural exports from the United States?
I think I've heard of worse things.
Yeah, but the same cannot be said for Hollywood, which is still trying to...
Yeah, didn't Disney went down? Didn't Warner Bros. Go down like 12% after that?
...recover from the pandemic, writer strikes, and costly streaming wars. Hollywood is known to adjust films in order to appease China and its audience. Paramount Pictures tried to get Top Gun Maverick released in China, and they actually removed Japan and Taiwan patches from the flight jackets. But China still refused to allow the movie into the country because of its celebration of U.S. military strength.
Wait. Like, trying to send Top Gun over to China, and they're like, maybe it'll be fine if we get rid of the U.S. patches. Okay, listen, they've got a different environment over there, a different political culture, they've got censorship. If we could just remove the U.S. flags, everything will be fine. That's like the only American thing in Top Gun, right?
Strength. So the patches were put back on in the version that we all got to see. So clearly these production houses, they're still trying to flirt with China, get the movies in there. But it's gotten so bad that film executives say that breaking into the communist country, it's a...
One moment.
Taylor?
Thank you so much. Dagan, your thoughts?
I don't care. I don't care one lick, one soup sign about Hollywood. And I think I speak for the audience. You know what? Don't let the door hit you where the good Lord...
Fox is only covering damage to woke industries. They're pretending tariffs don't affect their base. Remember when Elon was literally crying in an interview because Tim Walz was mean to him because Tesla's price went down? And he was like, what kind of person would do that? Laugh at another person's misfortune? And every single Republican just does that nonstop. It's their only job. It's the only thing they care about. Why do they all always sound drunk and medicated at Fox News? They do, genuinely. That's one of the reasons why Pete Hegseth's alcoholism was such a big deal, that it came from like 7 people. It was reported on by like 7 people from Fox News, because they're all drunk. So for Hegseth to be like noted as an alcoholic in that environment, it has to be pretty bad.
China is raising the stakes on retaliation, raising its tariff on U.S. goods to 125% overnight, effective tomorrow, after President Trump yesterday raised the tariff on Beijing to 145%. Xi Jinping remaining defiant, saying China has never relied on handouts in over 70 years, and it is not afraid of, quote, unjust suppression. Joining me now is White House Senior Counselor for Trade and Manufacturing, Peter Navarro. Peter, it's great to see you this morning.
Yeah,
Thanks so much for joining me.
Great to be with you, Maria.
I want to get your take on these deals that President Trump is doing and that you and your team are doing. But first, give us your reaction to now, Xi Jinping, thumping that chest, saying, oh, yeah, you're going there, we're going here, 125% on U.S. goods. How impactful is this going to be?
I love it. I'm going to talk a lot about China. Let me just say 90 deals in 90 days, biggest, broadest tax cut in American history, should be driving the tape. That's what's going to be a bullish market. And if you're not long, you're going to...
Before I answer your question on our relationship with this other superpower, let me diverge a little bit and avoid the question by talking about some of these other approved, like, boasting points that we have. 90 deals that haven't actually happened yet, and a trade cut or a tax cut that hasn't actually happened yet.
To get left behind. Now, China. Let's talk a little bit about China. The president has said several times now that he would love to hear from China to talk about where we're at. And here's where we're at, Maria. From our perspective, China's killed over 1 million Americans with deadly fentanyl and related drugs.
Oh, yeah.
And it simply refuses to do anything about that. Many of these people are prime-age workers, so they not only kill Americans.
Dude, look at the Fox News, main Fox News, look at how little they've talked about China. It's crazy. Jesse Waters, Trump team hitting China with a 2-punch combo. Superpower rumble. Trump fights to contain China all over the globe. Trump's full court press on China is on. Katie Pavlik. Level the playing field. Kevin O'Leary on U.S. trade with China. Tariff turmoil. This is what's scaring China the most, expert says. Breaking. China retaliates against Trump tariffs, says trade war will become a joke. This is the only title that isn't narrativized in their favor. And is that it? Oh my God. You can really, like, the this is looking bad, talk about anything else, you know? At least on Fox Business they talk about this. Bird crashes Peter Doocy's report, quote, landed on my head. That's great, Fox News. Really important stuff there.
They're killing our workforce. At the same time, as you know, Maria, and we talk a lot about this, since 2001, China has destroyed over 60,000 American factories and stolen over 5 million manufacturing jobs. That's the state of play. So all we're asking for is fairness. Now, from the Chinese point of view, let me see if we can kind of go there. Let's suppose that I'm an advisor to President Xi right now. What am I telling him? I'm telling him that the Americans have a very legitimate gripe and beef here. They're not.
Yeah, I'm sure that's what they're talking about back there. That's probably true.
Attacking China unfairly. They're simply asking us to stop killing them and stop stealing their jobs with their various unfair trade practices. What we should do, Mr. Xi, again, I'm a Chinese advisor right now, is do what we should have done over a decade ago, is move towards a domestic consumption-dependent economy and lift our people out of prosperity.
Just simply make your economy export dependent to import dependent. Reverse the currency valuation somehow and get all of your stuff from other countries like we do. We should be like the West, you know? Just rely eternally on the labor and production of powerless countries that you can bully.
Not just with wages, but to give them the wherewithal to actually buy stuff, and that we should move to an accommodation and pick up the phone. And I would tell President Xi.
If I was an advisor to President Xi, I'd tell him, please pick up the phone. We don't know. This is a game of chicken that we don't know if we're positioned well in. Please pick up the phone.
If I'm his advisor, it's like, look, we're a prisoner of our history. The British unfairly killed us with their opium, took our wealth, took our ports with these unequal treaties. But this is not that with the Americans. The Americans have a very legitimate beef with us, and we need to come to some kind of accommodation and pick up the phone. Yeah. That's where they should go. Now, that advisor would probably wind up immediately in a Chinese prison, and therein lies the tale.
Yeah, unbelievable. Peter, I know you've studied China a lot over your career. I remember years ago talking about the bad behavior of the CCP with you. How would you assess the Chinese economy today? In other words, the tariffs that President Trump is putting on the Chinese economy is going to have a much bigger impact, in my view, on the Chinese economy than the opposite in terms of what they're doing to us.
You can't be a surplus economy, which China is, running a massive trade surplus with us, and think you can possibly win moving up the escalatory ladder. The rest of the world has gotten that message.
Wait, what? You can't win a trade war as a country that supplies other countries. Being a domestic manufacturing powerhouse that fuels the rest of the world's economy doesn't put you in a good position for a trade war. What are you talking about?
I mean, if you think about the trade deficits we run with the EU, with Vietnam, with South Korea, with Japan, with India and others, Malaysia, Indonesia, If they tariff us at the same rate, they're hurting themselves far worse. And the same thing with China. They haven't. China. I mean, again, I think they're a prisoner.
If they don't have the markets to sell the excess capacity, yeah, but they're the ones with the stuff. Also, China does. They've divested their markets. They sell to other countries, not just America. They sell to the whole world. Whereas America relies on the stuff being this is like asking, like, if the man and the who needs the farmer to eat and the farmer who needs his crops purchased by the man both decide not to do business with each other anymore, which one of them hurts more? The man without the farm, because he starves to death. Like, yeah, the farmer with the food doesn't have anywhere to sell his food, but he does have food.
Of their history, it's almost hubris. Their pride, going back to the Opium Wars. But I would just simply say, this is not that, China. This is not that. You're killing Americans. You're taking our jobs, and the rest of the world is watching you, because it's not just America that you're hurting. You're hurting you take from Latin America and Africa all their natural resources. You dump goods into Europe. And that it's an unsustainable equilibrium. That's the bottom line. We got to a point, Maria, where the U.S. can't keep doing what it's doing. We're sending too much of our wealth abroad through the trade deficit and losing too many jobs, and we don't.
We buy their stuff. We want them. That's why that interaction happens. How is an equilibrium unsustainable? Yeah, definitionally, is it not sustainable?
Don't have the ability to defend ourselves because we're losing our defense industrial base. And China can't keep dumping stuff on world markets thinking that everybody's going to keep buying it. So they need to take care of their own people. They need to let their own people be consumers, not just work in their slave labor sweatshops.
Well, they're gonna get that if they haven't already. President Trump is not ruling out extending the 90-day pause on tariffs. Here's the president yesterday responding to Fox Business's Edward Lawrence. Watch this.
Again, just like, do keep in mind that we are so far. Listen, Trump literally said he's going to slow down deportations for illegal immigrants who are working for farmers or whatever, so that they can keep their slave worker population. Like, that's like leave aside the little incidences, the fact that we have prisoner firefighters in California or whatever. We have millions and millions and millions of people that occupy the undocumented immigrant effective slave labor class. It's insane. And they're they've been officially acknowledged and validated by Trump now,
So how close are you to the first country coming to actually make a deal with the United States over tariffs? Is it days, months?
Well, I think it's very close, but we have to have a deal that we like. We don't want a deal that's going to be a bad deal, or I could make every deal in one day if I wanted to.
China retaliated today by reducing the number of American films that can be shown there. What's your reaction to them now targeting cultural exports from the United States?
I think I've heard of worse things than.
That's the Hollywood one.
The president is so.
They really, really, really like that line because they like to pretend again that the only industries being affected by this trade war are Hollywood. They're probably going to run stories on how blue-haired, I don't even transgender NGOs are no longer able to source the printer paper they use for their handbooks on, experiencing trans euphoria or something. And they're going to talk about how their costs have gone up and they're all going to laugh about it. We hate Disney, though. Yeah, kind of crazy how Disney kowtowed to the right and nothing changed. They fought with Ron DeSantis for a bit, and then when Trump won, they stopped, and they've been receding and censoring trans people out of their media or whatever, when it was already planned that they were going to be there. And it hasn't changed. It's not they're not being held in favor by the right. Crazy how that works.
Bonnie, I love that answer. But Australia's deputy prime minister shut down China's offer to work together against Trump's tariffs, saying that they will not make common cause or hold hands, quote unquote. Europe as well. You just mentioned Europe. They signaled last night after the close, no partnership with China. They declined to accept China's rerouted dumped goods into the United States. But Peter, you just mentioned a minute ago, 90 deals in 90 days. So can you give us...
I have a feeling she's probably lying about that. I sincerely doubt China approached the European Union and they were like, hey, do you want our excess dumped goods from the trade war that's less than a week old? Like, from the trade contracts that haven't even been cut yet? Do you want, like, the dumped goods from that? I don't think that's real.
An update, Peter. Where are we in terms of all these negotiations? Go ahead.
I'd love to take you behind the scenes, Maria, because it's so different from the first term. Jamieson Greer, the United States Trade Representative, he's got over 30 years of experience. He's a calm, kind person, but he's the toughest SOB in the world when it comes to trading. He's at the tip of the spear for the president because he's the United States trade rep. He's got a whole portion of our White House working day and night. We started working on these deals months ago. Because we anticipate, that's what we do, we anticipate. So what's going to happen here is Jamieson Greer and Howard Lutnick are going to work very closely together. Howard, in addition to knowing the bond market better than anybody in the world, is also a great negotiator. So we're going to run 90 deals in 90 days is possible. The boss is going to be the chief negotiator. Nothing's done without him looking very carefully at it. He has such a fine attention to detail. Scott Bessent is going to handle countries like Japan and South Korea, where there's a lot of currency issues associated with that. And then you have Kevin Hassett, who you had many times on your show, who's really, really good analytically, and also is carrying the football with Scott on the tax policy, which is an important part of our situation.
Yeah,
Stephen Miller.
Okay, he's just listing all the guys he knows. One more China video. You guys are doing so well. I know you're getting all China'd out.
All right, joining us now, we've got NBC News White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard,
Four people.
NBC Global Supply Chain reporter Lori Ann LaRocco, Senior Vice President and Director of Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations.
Specifically, whether President Trump would pick up the phone call to call Xi Jinping and begin these negotiations or begin a stand-down effort on the tit-for-tat tariffs. And while she skirted that direct question, there is no apparent conversations or dialogue happening between China and the U.S. at this time. But she said that she was optimistic that China would understand that they need the U.S. economy and they need to maintain their relations with America, and that ultimately that they would come and find a way to strike a deal. Of course, during Trump's first administration,
Can you imagine if Trump was talking this way to like an ex-girlfriend? Remember the line from the other day? I think China wants to make a deal with us. They just don't know how to. They're very prideful. Listen, trust me, she's begging to come back. Just not in the form of like directly asking to come back. But she will, don't worry. Like she'll text me back. I can't text her first. That would make me look weak. But like, you know, Alexa, play Grimes' last album. That was so funny. I really hope that was true. Maybe someone in chat was lying when they said that Elon was listening to Grimes when he was getting rolled in Path of Exile. I don't know if it's true. I want to believe that it's true. No, it was? Okay, just like, that's crazy. That's really crazy.